Hi, good evening, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. So today is our ninth section of history of Greco-Roman philosophy. And last week we talked about pre-Socratic philosophy on the Asia Minor, which is so-called Malaysian school or Ionian school. So today we are going to move to the other side of map, which is on the southern Italy. And I will call it the Eleatic school, but they may not be the proper name. But anyway, to the end of today's meetup, you probably can give me some suggestion what would be the good name for this school. And the next week, we are going to move on to Democritus and Epicurus, okay, which is on the Greek side. Okay, so the same time with Plato and Aristotle. So that's the schedule, and then so here on this philosopher on the map, that's all the philosopher I try to cover, and the blue one is the one we already covered. Okay, so we already cover all these philosophers, and the red one is the one we are going to cover today. And the black one is the we are going to cover in the future. So I hope you can go through all these philosophers and then get the idea what's the Western tradition of philosophers. Okay. So basically, today, last week we deal with the philosopher on this area, and today we are going to deal with the philosopher in this area. Okay. So next week we are going to deal with the philosopher Greek. Okay. So if you were here last week, then you can tell the significant difference between the philosophers or philosophies in this side and the philosophy this side. Okay. So today let's go over, and the basics of what we are going to do is we already covered the Platonic dialogue and Aristotle's writing. And then last week we talked about the because the pre-Socratic philosopher, they don't have writing, they don't have books like Plato and Aristotle. Only thing we have is a fragment. So a lot of things we have to rely on the second sources, and then we have, and a lot of things are just fragment. So we have to rely on other writing to figure out. So in this case, that means we don't have the complete book to read. But just like I will show some of text, and we can read together. And if you have a question or something you feel you feel interested, then you can bring it up to discuss. So that's the philosopher I kind of lay out. Last week we talked about in this area, which is Ionian school. And this week we are going to talk about philosophy in this area. And the next week we are going to deal with these three philosophers, okay? Lucretius, Democritus, and Epicurus. So that's we are going, and then you will see today I try to conclude the pre-Socratic philosophy. Basically, I will quickly overview on last week on the Malaysian school, and this area that will be the focus on today. And then we will, to this point, we finish the pre-Socratic philosophies. And then next week we can move on. So I think next week I will conclude the Greek philosophy, and then the week after I will move on to Roman philosophies. So that's the schedule. So before I move on, is any question or any comment or anything you want to talk about? I will pause for a few 1 minute if you have Anything to say? Okay, so since everybody is fine, so okay, so let's move on. So I think, okay, last week we already deal with this. The very beginning of Western philosophy, we start from the Medicean school or Medicean philosophers. Basically, last week we talked about Thales, Anaximander, and Anaximenes. So these three philosophers, basically, we call them Medicean philosophers because they are on Lydia, which in today's Turkey. There's one common thing they all talk about. They are, in today's sense, they are scientists. So what they are talking about is they talk about archery, okay, which means the starting point or the basic stuff. So they try to use something called archery, the fundamentals to explain everything. Instead of go through the mythology, they more on the material way. So sometimes people call them empiricism or call them the material monism. So for example, Thales try to say everything is water. So he want to use water to explain everything. And the Anaximander try to say everything is ethereal. Ethereal is something boundless, mist, we don't know what's that. And Anaximenes and try to use fire, air to explain everything. So that's a Medicean school. And then after that comes Pythagoras. Pythagoras is also on the Asian side, but I think everyone knows who is Pythagoras. He do the in the middle school or primary school geometry. We all know the Pythagorean rules, right? The a square plus b square equal to c square. But it's pretty reasonable. If you think about this kind of discovery, you will go in the way it's a very rationality, very rational way, right? You can find out any right triangle, you can find out the third side by knowing two sides. In a way, it's rational. But in a way, they also find out the irrational side because it's pretty easy to find out, to face this kind of situation. If it's a right triangle, it's one on the other side, and the other side must be square root 2. And the square root 2 basically has no way to use two integers to represent it. And then we all know the number is 1.1421. So become a number which beyond ancient people to understand. So in this case, it kind of go to mystical because that's kind of conflicts between rational and irrational side. So that's a two sides of conflict. So in this case, Pythagorean turned out that he become a religious cult. So he moved, if we look at the map, he moved from Samos, okay, and to Croton on this side. Okay. So to set up his religious group, and then he's not just by himself, like he probably gathered a lot of people together. So we call them Pythagoreanism. Okay. So that's a Pythagorean become a group. And he probably, of course, we don't have enough historical evidence to show what's the activity they are doing. And then I copy from the history of Western philosophy by Bertrand Russell. And then that's their rule they are doing. Okay, so I'm not sure how accurate of this one. We all know Bertrand Russell write the book and he has his own opinion. So just for your reference. So it looks like it's a little bit mystical and religious kind of group. So that's about Pythagoras. He's from, we can call him a mathematician, geometrician, And then later on, he become a religious leader, okay, religious cult. So that's about the Pythagoras. So a Malaysian school, and then come with the Pythagoras, which struggle with rational and irrational. And later on, he moved from the Asia Minor to southern Italy to set up his group. So that's the history goes. So I will stop here for 1 second. If you have question, comment. Okay, so next I'm going to move on to the so-called officer. I copy this one from Bertrand Russell's writing. I think his comment is very interesting when he talked about the southern Italian side, and he talked about morphism. Orphism is Orpheus, and Orpheus is in the Greek mythology. He went to the hell and to find his wife. Okay, so that's a little mystic. So I will read this one. The Orphics were an aesthetic sect. Wine to them was only a symbol. As later in Christian and intoxication, they saw as enthusiasm of union with the God. So they believe themselves in this way to acquire mystic knowledge, not attainable by ordinary means. So think about the Pythagorean's idea, right? So square root 2 is something you cannot reach by the ordinary means. And what you try to do is you try to do mystic, consider as mystical knowledge, and you have to use this way to do it. So this one, in Bertrand Russell's view, is a new religion, and then for it, one sense is new, and then he said it's popular in southern Italy and Sicily. Okay, so basics is the idea is during that time in that area, beginning with so-called the Bacchus. Okay, Bacchus is the god of wine, and they go party and drinking and orgy, this kind of thing. And then they have the mystical movement, like Orphism. Okay. And the Pythagorean is bring up this one. So Bertrand Russell writes is the Orphics, unlike the priests of Olympian cult, founded what we may call churches. So it's a religious community to which everybody, without distinction of race or sex, could be admitted by initiation and form their influence aroused in the conception of philosophy as a way of life. So this one is the beginning of the church and this kind of mystical community idea of religion. Okay. So you will see on the Asian Minor side, all the philosophers are more we call the scientists. And then on the southern Italian side, we call the Eleatic school. They are more on the religious, mystical side. And so that's the difference between two sides. So before we move on to the philosopher of Heraclitus, and then I would like to see how you think about this, and then any question or any idea, suggestion? So far so good. Okay, so let's move on. Last week we talked about this philosopher. He is so-called Heraclitus, and really like to read his writing on that. And he do have he is one of the what we should call, he's the first philosopher we have his writing, even it's not a complete writing. So we have a fragment. That's why last week I show the put the reading as for the meetup. So I don't want to repeat what we have last week, but basically his key idea, key philosophy is sometimes we call the philosopher of riddles. He has a paradox philosophy, and he talk about logos, and then his idea talking about becoming, and then sometimes we call the doctrine of perpetual flux. And remember when during that time on the Ionian side, which is Asia Minor, they all talk about archer. Okay, so the archer he's talking about is fire. So that's his philosophy. And I probably want to quickly read. I think last week we read this one. I just copy some of them, not all. Basics on the very first one is important. We talk about these logos is true evermore, okay, forever true. So that's his key thing. And then he talk about the famous thing is he talk about you cannot step twice into the same river, for fresh water are ever flowing on you. Okay, so that's his famous saying about this. And the time is the child playing a game of draughts. Okay, draughts is kind of the chess game, and the kingship is in the hand of a child. And he talked about war, and the war is the father of all, and the kind of all, the king of all. Life is justice. It's a little bit controversial, but that's the fragment we left. And about the nature, he talked about the fire of is for all things. And then at that time, they already had idea of 4 elements. And he already started to talk about the element is changing. Remember his philosophy, because during that time, I think it's in the ancient people, the first thing they try to explain is what's going on in this world, right? So the world is changing. So they try to find out what's the rule. So Heraclitus is talking about the things changing, becoming. So earth become fire, fire become air, air become water, water become earth. In his word, he means the death of earth comes with fire, and the death of fire comes with air, and the death of air comes with fire, and the death of water, and the death of water comes with earth. So there is one like a cycle. So that's his view on that. So he also talked about the soul. Okay. So interesting is he believes the soul is like to go to moist. Okay. It's its pleasure to soul to become moist. But the dry soul is the widest and the best. So this idea, the philosophy he is talking about is our soul has nature to get wet, okay? But only the smart people, the best people will make his soul dry, okay? So that we can see, well, in today's interpretation, we may see as a modern people, you may see that doesn't make sense, but we have to appreciate he is the person start to, instead of look at the nature, he start to give some moral lesson. So I think that's advanced in this point of view. And then we can move on. Then he talked about, I don't have highlight on this one. And then, okay, I think this one to me, I think is more important because he start to look at Heraclitus, start to look at this world is kind of a paradoxical universe, right? So he started to talk about the sea is the purest and impurest water, right? Fish can drink it, but the man cannot drink it. Okay, it's destructive. We see everything is not pure good or pure bad. We talk about pig wash in the mud, and the fowl wash in dust. Because mud and dust are dirty, but they clean with this one. And the asses, donkey, would rather have a straw than gold. Okay, so he started to look at this universe as a paradoxical view. Okay, there's no pure good, pure bad, even in the person. So he also talk about to my logos, compared to all things, everything is one. So basics, that's his philosophies, and then what we have is just, I think total is about 120 fragments left, and a lot of things are interpret or reinterpret by Aristotle and Plato. So, you know, and last time when I think Dan was here, he can read Greek and he has some more insight about, you know, what the actual meaning is. So I will pause here for a few 1 minute if you have a question or you have some more text you want to read on this one. So after this, I'm going to move to the Eleatic school. No question?
Jason?
Yes, please. Ron?
Yeah.
Okay, please.
I just wondered if you ever came across in your readings any explanation, or you might have some your own feeling about why it seemed that on one side of Greece, to their east, it was a very materialistic, scientific Milesian, right?
Mm-hmm, yeah.
Yeah, what we would call very left brain today, very,
Okay, yeah.
you know?
Yeah. And why the other side is mystical?
And the other is what, yeah, we would call very right brain, you know? So I wonder if it had anything to do with.
I only know one side, okay, not the other side, okay. So I know some scholar talk about the Milesian school, which is on the east, right, on the Asian Minor side. They are more scientific. The reason is in the early time, Malaysia as a city, they are very successful in their trading. So technically, they probably live a very good materialistic life. Okay, so they enjoy a lot of life, good life. So for the people enjoy the good material life, probably less interest in God, or use they believe God, or the Greek gods, Zeus, Hera, all people, they believe it, but they don't use the mythology to explain what's going on in this world. Okay, so I think that's the reason. Well, it's not my idea. I read it on other article. Regarding on the other side, which is on the southern Italian side, that's why I bring up this one, officer, and I copy from Bertrand Russell. Okay, so also not my idea. He's talking about they have the religious movement. Okay, and he talked about officer. And officer being considered, according to Bertrand Russell, it's a new religious movement which originated from Egypt, okay, because they deal with death. Okay, before their religion is more on Bacchus. Bacchus is the god of wine. Okay, and then easily being replaced for the new religion, which is Orphism, and which is praise the god of Orpheus, who is the god of music, because I think Apollo taught him how to play lyre, and he became an expert in music. So that's a new movement, and because the story is he went to the hell, Hades, and to rescue his wife, and turned out he lost his wife. All this kind of story. So it's related to the death, and they start to think about things mystically. So that's the only thing I can offer. You know, I hope it satisfies you, Ron.
Okay, I have one other question.
Yeah, please.
That time, roughly the 6th century, 5th century BC, is often referred to as the axial age. there was a lot going on in that age. In India, you had the Buddha arising, and in China, you had Lao Tzu, etc.
Yeah.
And I was wondering in that era, was the Silk Road in existence? Was it being used in that period, or was the Silk Road something that came later? Because I was wondering about.
No, Silk Road is much later.
Much later.
Road, yeah, Silk Road is on the first century, okay, after first century until the 6th centuries, they start to reach the India, and
Okay,
then
so if Greece got any insights from that part of the world, it probably would have been through the merchants from seagoing merchants and stuff, more likely, right?
from sea, I don't know about sea because I don't see the technology probably not mature enough.
So, because there were suggestions that Plato might even have, in the 12 years when they don't know where he went, it may have traveled all the way to India. So I was wondering if
some people talk about he even went to India. Yes, okay. But most likely is when you read the Plato's philosophy, you will see a lot of similarity. You will see definitely the influence by the Pythagorean idea. Okay, so we will talk about later. In a few minutes about the Parmenides, and for sure he studied with Parmenides, which is a lot of mystical thinking. And I know a lot of people kind of start to question about whether or not Indian and Greek have a connection, and then I don't know, and then probably there's no solid historical evidence to say okay they have a connection, but for sure they have a connection is after 300 BC when Alexander the Great conquered northern India, and they have a lot of things for sure. Okay, so for example, the skepticism, Pyrrhonism, okay, they are definitely they have some related connection with India. But during this time, we don't know. Only thing we know is both Indian and Greek, they have the concept of reincarnation. You are reborn, okay? Your soul will recycle again and again. But do they invented independently? I don't know. Okay, probably just coincidence. I don't know.
Okay.
So I hope I answered the question.
Yeah, it's a good answer. It's the best answer. I don't know.
Yeah, we don't know. Some people may claim they know, but I'm happy to listen to that. But I just can tell you what I read and what I heard. So, okay. So, any other question or anything you want to discuss before I really move on to the Italian side?
I have a question.
Yes, please.
Yeah, it's in the Subas thing. Yeah, on the previous number 118, it says, don't listen to me, but listen to my.
Which one? Oh, you mean the
last one.
Okay, hold on. Let me see. Okay, this one. Okay, 118, right?
Right.
Okay, it's wise to hearken, not to me, but to my logos. And to
right.
Okay.
Basically, logos is the soul or the knowledge of things, right?
No, logos is a lot of translation will change to words or reason, right?
Well,
so,
yeah, that's the very obvious one.
Yeah, yeah. So, and then if you want to bring like a key lesson of Heraclitus, and logo is probably the number one. He probably the first one to mention about logos. And then of course, what's the meaning of logos? That's a big question. But
yeah,
he's the first one talking about this.
Because that even comes down to Christianity talking about logos.
Yes, if you yeah. If you talk about the John 1:1, right? Where at the beginning there's a word, and the word is God. The word with God.
Right.
And the word basics is from Greek word logos, right?
Yeah, it means a lot of number of things. When it says all things are one,
Yeah.
is there some identification of that one is? Is it like, for example, if you talk about God, you would talk about one. Um, so does that have any connotation or any
I,
thing?
I don't know. Okay, but I believe okay during that time they are looking we can call them moism, right? Because they believe on something on the background, the starting point is they call it arche. That's a Greek word, arche, arche. Okay, so they mean the fundamental stuff, right?
That means correct. You're right. It's the beginning.
Yeah, the beginning. Yeah. So he probably talked about this because this one we
Right.
Yeah.
So basically, it would be what we call now the universe.
Yeah, you can know this way. And then the reason I bring this one, and I thank you to bring up this one, and then you will see this, we talk about one, okay? And when we talk about Eleatic school, okay, on the southern Italian side, their one, so-called one, is very different than what Heraclitus talk about one. Even they all deal with something called one or oneness. And then because they are on the different side, and they have different teaching on that.
Thank you.
So we can say, if I move on to the southern Italian side, so-called the Eleatic school. So basically the reason called Ilia, because this area, okay, if you look at the map, it's on this area. And then their philosophy basics is, we can say they are response to what's happened on the other side, Heraclitus. Okay. So usually if you search for the internet, okay, you probably will get the Eleatic school for sure, have these three philosophers, Parmenides and Zeno and Melissus. But sometimes people include the Xenophanes, okay, and because he was from the other side, but eventually he settled on here, Syracuse, okay. So he's kind of, again, same situation happened. He's more on the religious side. He start to believe the God, it should have one God, okay, and he's talking about the fox or tiger. If tiger has hand to draw their god, not look like tiger. If they have fox or donkey has hand, they will draw their god like donkey. So he start to think God is one. So this kind of thing has come up. And then, so we talk about Xenophanes last week. So basically that eventually he was on the other side and he was a scientist kind of person, but later on, same as Pythagoras, he's more on the religious and he moved on here. So just try to answer Ron's question, why people on this side is more scientific and on this side is more mystical? I still don't know, but whenever they become more mystical, religious, they move to this side. So that's the only thing we find out. So that's the Eleatic school, and we have these people, and we are going through, but basics, we are going to talk about Parmenides. And he is the most important, probably has a strong influence on Socrates, not necessarily Socrates, but most likely Plato's. When we talk about Plato's, have a 12 years escape, because Socrates was sentenced to death, and Plato know he is in danger, so he went overseas. We don't know whether or not he went to India or whether or not he went to, he probably went to Egypt, and for sure he went to southern Italy, and he learned. I don't know he met Parmenides or not, but for sure he learned a lot of things from Parmenides. So there's one dialogue called Parmenides, and Plato set up the scene is Socrates, Parmenides, and Parmenides' student Zeno. Their discussion. Okay, so that's the thing. So Parmenides' philosophy. Okay, I don't know how many of you read this one, but I just have to say, first time I read it, I just have to say it's weird. Okay, it's crazy. How can you call this philosophy? But after a while, I start to appreciate, okay, what he invented, put this way. So I will say this way. Is somebody talking? Can you mute it? It's Will. Okay, I'm going to mute you. I'm going to mute everyone. Okay, so Parmenides. Okay, so basics. Let me make it very simple. What he is looking for, I think we talk about one, right? He believes in this world, this universe, it's one, and he has his conclusion is this. Okay, I'm sure everyone first time hear this will feel very strange. He talk about this universe, talk about the truth is only one, which is changeless, okay, motionless. It's a solid, it's finite, it's ungenerated, it's indestructible, it's a sphere. Okay, so that's the universe. Okay, and then how does he come with this conclusion? He based on three assumptions, which all Greek words, they all believe these three things. First, they all believe nothing can come from nothing, or nothing can disappear into nothing. Okay, so something cannot disappear into nothing. Okay, so that's they all believe. He's not going to argue on that. Number two, the Greek all believe the reality. If we talk about truth, there's only one. You cannot have this truth and this one is truth. So there's only one reality. So number three, whatever really exists is identical with whatever property is really is. It's a little bit strange, but basically what they believe is in today's world, we will say, if this, they don't separate, let's say fire is hot. They don't separate what is fire and what is hot. So when we say the fire is hot, they will consider the hotness and the fire are the same thing. Another example is ice. Ice is cold, and the coldness is also part of the ice. So they don't separate the property and the material. So these three things are the Greek all believe. And the Parmenides is based on this universal, so-called universal belief. Based on his logic, he draw the conclusion, because based on this assumption, this world must be one, okay, and must be changeless, motionless, because there's no void, okay. If there's no space, how can you change? How can you move? And then infinity is not possible, so it must be finite, and the indestructible is a sphere. So that's his philosophy, and he is drawing from this. And then how does he come this one? I don't want to go to the too much detail of why we appreciate his philosophy, because he is the first person start to use logic. So sometimes we call him the father of logic, because he used logic and he believed what's the deduction, okay, from the result from your logic deduction, not what you see. So everybody easily to argue with him, well, come on, everything is moving, my hand can move, this cup can move, I can burn something which disappear, and the baby is nowhere, then you can have a baby, right? And a small a seed can grow to an oak tree. Okay, so acorn can become an oak tree. You can argue on this, but his point is we have to believe the logic, not what you see. What you see just, you say, phenomenon. Okay, so the images. So that's the we can do some of his reading. So I think I post the reading. If you have read it, I just copy the entire text he has in this presentation, but I don't have intention to read all of them. I just want to show how does he write the philosophy. His writing, including, of course, that's a fragment, and the people, some scholars try to piece them together and come with a kind of writing, and which is not very long. So if you have time, I would suggest you take a look and you can read it. And I think it's very readable and just a little bit weird. And if you know the overall structure, you may not be that difficult to understand. So his writing has three parts, so-called on nature. First is prologue. He's talking about he's been bring up to some place and enter the gate of the way of night and day, and they have the goddess, okay, Greek, which is Parmenides, and then this one, okay, greet him and took his hand and then speak to him. Okay, so the following is the speaking from the goddess till Parmenides. Okay, so that's the way of he do it. Basically, he's talking about, okay, you should restrain thy thought from this way of increase and don't let habit by your experience. So the key word is here. The goddess taught Parmenides, you have used new way of thinking. You should give up your habit learned by experience. If you recall what's happened on the Asia Minor, Milesians philosopher, they all based on their experience to explain things. So here is talking about you have to rely on logic. Then we come with two parts. First part is the way of truth, okay, and the other part is the way of belief. So he's the first person to separate, okay, what is truth and what just you believe. And what he's talking about, a sphere, changeless, motionless, okay, he's talking about the truth. So he talk about the truth. So basically he separates first what that it is and it is not. Okay, so you have to believe what it is. And then he started talking about the truth, what is uncreated and indestructible. It's a complete, immovable, without end. That's he's talking about. So he talked about the truth is not divisible, and since all alike, and there is no more of it in one place than in another to hinder from holding together. So basically talk about the truth, the sphere is indivisible. So that's the way he talked about the truth, and then it has limit, it's complete on all sides, like the mass, a rounded sphere equally posed from the center to all directions. So that's the goddess told Parmenides about the truth. That's the truth, okay? And then he continue on the third part. He talked about the way of belief. So that's the motto, okay? The regular people understand the word. So previous, the way of truth is understood by immortal, which is God, okay, which is truth. And the way of belief is understood by mortal, the regular people. So he talked about henceforward then the belief of mortals and give ear to deceptive order of my word. So basically he talking about the she's talking about the real world. What you see is not real. So you see something disappear, the baby was born, an acorn tree, acorn grow become a big oak tree. That's all not real. Okay, the real, the truth is that. Okay, so so here let me read on. She is the beginner of all painful births of beginning, driving the female to embrace the male to that of female. So the conclusion, that's what Thus, according to man's opinion, these things come into being. Thus, they are not. In time, they will grow up and pass away. To each of these things, men have assigned a fixed name. So that's his writing, and something is a little bit, I would say, mystical, right? On the right, boys, on the left, girl. I really don't know what they mean, but basics, that he's writing, always looking the beam of the sun. I think here he talking about, I think he talking about this. I read some scholar explain this. He's talking about what we see is just like a moon. Moon is borrow the light from the sun. Okay, they already know this. So it's not real truth. Okay, so the real truth is the sun, the light. Okay, so if you remember, or if you know, Plato's the allegory of cave, right? He's talking about everyone is in the cave. The only truth is happen when you leave the cave, going outside. Okay, then that's the truth, and that's why this philosophy is important, because Plato's epistemology is borrowed from Parmenides. So that's the Parmenides side, and then I will stop for 1 minute if you have a question or something you want to further discuss, or you have any suggestion. Ron, please.
Yeah. So again, these two different areas. Again, the Milesian side, the east seems to be the sort of the ground from which empiricism would arise, right? And eventually, I think it would be what Aristotle was drawn to. Let me just.
I have to say yes.
Let me just set the whole scene, and then you can take it apart.
Okay, please.
Yeah. So the other side on the west is more what we would call maybe idealism, using ideas, the mind, reason, and I think that I would say that that Plato was more sympathetic to that way of looking at the creation. What do you think of that? I mean, it's all obviously oversimplified, and obviously Athens is kind of like in the middle, right? In Greece proper, so it's kind of, and like you said, when the empiricists become mystical, they move, they migrate, west.
Yeah, I don't know, because they migrate, so they become mystical, or they were mystical.
Yeah, I think mystical first, and then they migrate.
Yeah, probably they got mystical. They got kicked out from their neighbor, from their.
Yeah. Anyway, what I mean, it's sort of also, you could see those are the two main strands that all of Western philosophy is going to grow out of, those two basically different ways of seeing the creation, just like the left and the right hemispheres of our brain have two different ways of seeing the creation. It's very interesting.
Yeah, I also find it very interesting. And then I agree with you 100%, because of course it's oversimplified, but we can talk about this way, right? Because on the east side is empiricism, and on the west side is idealism. And actually Socrates, I believe, was influenced more on the east side. And then later on, Plato will be more on the west side, because he learned, and you will see in Plato's early, Plato's Socrates may not be real Socrates.
Early Plato is more empirical and more sympathetic, and as he matures, thinking process might to the West, and he becomes more and more mystical.
Yes, yes.
In the later Plato dialogues are much more mystical.
Yes, I agree. And then we have to wait a real scientist, Aristotle, to bring the idea back with more solid.
Like a pendulum, like a pendulum.
Yeah. So I think we probably think about it in the same way. And then I think this part is very interesting because we know all our Western philosophy, we can trace the source to Greek, okay? But their source is from these two sides, one on the east side, one on the west side, and which these two ideas are struggle to each other and until to the 18th century, you know, the British side and the continental philosophy, they all have.
I'm just curious in your academic studies, I'd be curious because North Africa and Egypt, you know, they were organized before the Greeks, you know, the Hebrews and the Egyptians, and they had what were called the mystery schools. They were already looking at all of these issues before the Greeks started looking at them. And since nothing comes out of a void, I wonder how much, you know, we know very little about the Egyptians, but they must have, the Greeks must have been influenced by the Egyptians. Have you made connections there at all?
I think so. Because in Plato's writing, they constantly talk about Egypt. So I'm sure they know Egypt. And that's why Bertrand Russell writes, he believes Orphism is from Egypt. And he draw the conclusion because from Egyptian religion. Okay, so that's what he said. And one surprising thing is all these Greek philosophers, nobody mentioned about Jewish community. So this part is a little bit mystical. You know, I don't know. And personally, I don't know much about, other than the Old Testament Bible, I don't know much about Jewish history. So that's the part that the link is not there because they're supposed to be in the same time, and there's no record about the Jewish community and their belief. So that's Hannah, please.
So I was just thinking about his way of truth, and if he's kind of isolating the concept of truth, it seems to kind of entail that there's the concept of, you know, untruth, not truth. Maybe that's the way of belief as well. But if those things are pretty opposite, how does that fit into his idea of monism, or like the one, the whole, that everything is unchanging and part of one thing? If how would we get from truth or non-truth to truth without an idea of change? Or how do we hold those concepts together if they seem to be like a duality?
Okay, so I think to answer this one, probably we have to go to the later philosophy. I think we will cover in a few minutes. Okay, because I think for sure, you know, Parmenides. Okay, first I'd like to say he talked about the way of truth, but the other way is not untruth. He's talking about way of belief. So he's talking about something. If I see this cup, okay, that's not really the truth. That's just what you believe this is cup. And they have the truth behind it. That's what he's talking about. So, but based on his logic, he draw the conclusion. Everybody knows. We don't need the modern people to know that's weird. I think during that time, the Greek people already see that's crazy. So his later philosopher try to resolve this problem, because just like what you questioned, yeah, we know there's only one truth. I'm not going to argue on it, but it's not one, right? It could be two, could be three, could be four. And how does this come out? You cannot just say, oh, that's just you believe and the truth. How do you from belief to the truth? They got to have a way to do it. So later philosophers try to resolve this problem, and that's what I'm going to do for the next 20 minutes. But before I move on, I would like to introduce his student, and he's famous, the Zeno. Okay, so if you read the, Zeno is Parmenides' student. Okay, and the way I talk about he's famous because Zeno's paradox, okay, is very famous, and it's being used not only in the Greek time, through the year. Okay, even like Hannah Burson and Bertrand Russell. I think Leibniz also talk about this, and not today's philosopher, but even in the 20th century philosophers still talk about Zeno's paradox. Okay, so I think probably some of you already heard this one, but I just like to do. He talked about many paradoxes, okay, paradoxes, but I just this four, because this four has been constantly discussed over 2,000 years, and then we don't have Zeno's writing on this. And the source, I think the first source is from Aristotle's physics. So I copy from Aristotle's physics. I should talk about this. So Zeno is the student of Parmenides. Remember, Parmenides' philosophy is talking about nothing change, everything is one, change is not possible. So Zeno, he has four, actually it's more than four, but I just list four because these four are famous. He lists four to prove, to show you motion is not possible. So the first one, okay, we can talk about is so-called Atalanta. Atalanta is a goddess who is a foot racer. So he said Atalanta cannot reach the goal, okay? Because when she want to run from here to here, right? She run the health and the wrong health and the wrong health and wrong health and wrong health. You will never reach it. So Zeno used to say, moving is not possible. Whatever you see moving, actually you see, you cannot even Atalanta cannot reach the goal. Second one, also famous about Achilles race with turtles, right? The turtle was here. Achilles tried to catch the tortoise. She ran here, and during this time, the tortoise already moved, and Achilles moved a little bit, and turtle moved a little bit, and he moved. So he get closer and closer, but he never has a chance to catch the turtles, right? Because right now he's talking about the time, the division of time, right? So you never have a chance to catch the turtles. And then also talk about the flying arrows. So he talk about the arrow. When you shoot an arrow, you will reach the target, but you take the moment by moment, because during that time, remember, the Greek doesn't have no concept of instant velocity, instant speed. We know we have a speed, instantly at that moment, what's the speed? But that's not developed until Newton. That's like 2,000 years later. So during that time, they consider everything move as a change of state. So in this concept, he said, okay, in this state, arrow is here, not moving. Here, it's not moving, not moving. So actually, the arrow itself is never moved. So that's his argument. Number 4, he talked about moving roles. Okay, so basically he's talking about that. This one is a little bit difficult. Okay, but I find out that that's probably the best way to understand. Let's say we have 3 roles: A1, A2, A3, B1, B2, B3, C1, C2, C3. They line up in this way. Okay, so this role is going to move to the right. This role will move to the left. Okay, so let's say every second, we move one space this way. So before they line up in this one, A2 with B3 with C1. Okay, so that's the line up, right? So next second, because this one will move to here, right? So B3 will move line up with A3. And then C1 will move the way to C1 will move the way to here, will line up with A1, right? So that's the way they are doing. And then so the question is here. After 1 second, A1, B1, C1 line up, A3, B3, C3 line up. But how come they miss the point, right? Because before C1 line up with B1, they have the period time C1 line up with B2. They just skip this part. So that's the paradox, okay, Zeno is talking about. So I know it probably it's easy to reject this argument, but you have to reject in the modern concept, right? Like instant speed, like infinitesimal, okay, in the infinitesimal, okay, space to explain. But how can you reject without this modern concept? That's the challenge here. So that's why this 4 paradoxes has been used over and over for 2,000 years. And even, I'm not sure today, but Bertrand Russell is the last one. He wrote it in 20th century, and he still, when he talked about the logic, he still used this one as an example. So it sounds like every philosopher, when you want to talk about the movement, you have to reject this one in your own way. So I hope I make it clear. And anything to question or any comment before I move on? So right now we're done with the Parmenides philosophies. Okay, so next one we're going to, of course, just like Hannah talked about. I think everyone will have conclusion. Okay, Parmenides philosophy is strange. Okay, how can it happen in this way? So Melissus is the first one try to improve. So basically, he talked about, he replaced, he said, he should have, he bring the concept of unlimited, infinity. So he basically modified Parmenides philosophy. Instead of the limited size sphere, he just said it should be infinity, because that's an obvious question, right? If you talk about a finite size of sphere, then easy to ask question. How about outside the sphere? What's there? Since there's no void, then they got to have something. So the easy solution by Melissus is infinity. Okay, that's his solution out there. And so that's the first solution. And then later on, okay, so this philosopher, okay, Empedocles, okay, from Anaxagoras, okay, also on Anaxagoras is on the Sicily, okay, on the west side of Sicily. So belong to the same school, and then he tried to resolve Parmenides' philosophy. He become more sophisticated. So basically, he's talking about 4 elements. Okay, so he talked about instead of 1, it's just like we need to explain. You know, you cannot just say, "Oh, that's just what you see. That's just the phenomenon you see, and the real is that." But how they have a connection. So he started to use 4 elements to connect. And just like we all understand, on the west side, in the southern Italian, they are more go to the mystical religious side. So their 4 elements is linked with God. So air with Zeus, earth with Hera, his wife, and the fire with Hades, and water with Persephone. So Persephone is the wife of Hades. And then you can see how they deal with this one, because they are superstitious. They even don't want to, when he's writing, he even doesn't want to talk about Hades because it's a taboo to call Hades and the Persephone's name because they are in the hell. So they call him Iodonius and Nestis. Okay, so that's their idea. And they talk about, so they even go more, okay? So they talk about original sin already because the sin, because you eat meat. Okay. So Empedocles also have the writing left in his fragment. So I also show some of this, so you can we can read this one together. Talk about the nature. We talk about fire and water and the earth and the matter. So okay, so we can think about it. He talked about 4 elements before. Parmenides, okay, talking about oneness, indivisible. But right now, if he replaced to 4, then he tried to explain how come it changed. So you must have the some force to make it change. So he bring up the 2 things. One is love, one is strife. So love is like attraction, okay, and strife is like push away. So he described in this universe, everything is the combination of the 4 elements, fire, water, earth, and air. And they have the 2 forces. One is love, one is strife. So we'll bring them together or split them together. So that's his idea of way to explain, okay, why there's one truth and why we see things is changing. So he talked about they have the 6 elements, right? 4 elements plus 2 forces. That's what he's talking about. And then his view of the universe is a cyclical view on the cosmos, right? He talked about at the beginning, okay, there's a pure love. So in this universe is harmony. So there's no life because everything is harmony. It's a beautiful, perfect situation. Okay, just like in heaven, there's no life, just there. Then the love increase. So they become the contention between love and the strife. And during that time, they have the presence of life. And later on, the strife going over, take over the love. So become everything just strife. So that's like he called chaos. I believe that means void and also means chaos. So there's no life. So that's emptiness. And then when the strife get more and life grow, there's another contention between strife and love. That's the place we have a life. So he believes that's the cycle, okay, in this world. So in the old time, they have the pure love. That's all good thing, okay. And then later on, that's the cycle. So that's his cosmic cycle and his view. And then you will see even up to Plato and even to the Plato, they all try to explain, okay, Parmenides philosophy. So that's it. And I just show some of his writing. He talk about something interesting. He talk about sea is the sweet of the earth. Okay? So that's his view. And then he even take one more step. Okay, he start to consider himself. I mean the Empedocles himself is immortal God, reincarnate as people. So he talked about, that's his writing. He said, I go among you an immortal God. He thinks he is immortal God. And they go after me in countless throne, ask me what is the way to gain and some desiring oracle, and beg me to hear from, beg to hear from me the word of healing. He talk about the people get sick and he can cure. And he started about the oracle of necessities, and he talked about the God, okay, or wander twice, 10,000 seasons, which has been borrowed by Plato's, okay, and the soul will travel, okay, 10,000 years, and they will have 3 times reincarnate. That's what he's talking about. And throughout the time, and he talk about for the mighty, the air will drive him to the sea, and the sea will change to the dry earth and to the sun, and back. That's the cycle. And he said, what of this? I am. Okay, so he talked about himself, Empedocles himself is an exile and wandering from the God. Okay, and for that I put my trust in Caesar's strife. So he turned out he's not only philosopher, he also a religious leader, and he believed he is a god. Okay, he's one of the gods. And according to the legend, he eventually he jumped over to the volcano of Ida, okay, and only left a cinder. So he died. Okay, so that's his story, and also his philosophy. So I will stop for a second before I move to Anaxagoras. So, yeah. Question, comment?
Yeah, you just had one slide on the philosopher before Empedocles. I forgot his name, but could you go back to that one slide? I think it was only one slide on.
You mean before the?
After Parmenides and before Empedocles.
After this one,
Yeah.
Melissa.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. You didn't. Maybe they don't have much, you know.
No, I don't have much information.
Yeah, about him, but what he's saying here is very profound in these three statements.
Yes.
He's saying whatever has a beginning and an end is basically not real. And then he says, being has no beginning or end, therefore it is eternal and unlimited. I don't know if any other philosophies before him, or even if they picked on it right away, but he seems to be introducing these concepts of eternal and unlimited.
Yeah, that's right. But
That's very big. That's a big deal.
I agree with you. That's a big deal. But Aristotle rejected, right? Aristotle very sure there's no.
Of course, because of his left hemisphere, he wants everything to fit into a compartment. But
Yes.
the mystics have no problem with these kind of paradoxes.
Oh, that's right. You are right. Yeah, because they are mystics.
But this is, this would be, you could easily, sort of you could overlap this over the Tao, for example.
Yes, that's right.
And in Hinduism, you could, the same thing could be said of the, the Brahman. But I think that Plato, he's going after this thread here. Plato is much more heading, in this direction, whereas Aristotle is kind of going away from this direction.
I agree with you. Yes, and you make a good point. Hinduism and the Chinese, they don't have a problem of eternal and unlimited, right?
Right.
Yeah, only the I think it's the Malaysian Ionian school, they probably have a problem with this.
Very, because just like humans who are left brain predominant versus right brain, and because they see the world so differently, they very rarely can come to agreement on a lot of fundamental issues. And I think it's the same thing here, depending on what apparatus the human being is using to understand what the creation, they create different narratives, different pictures of the world, and they're not really compatible.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Great. Thank you.
But then, I was reading the Buddhism. They have this thing called the doctrine of the two truths.
Yes, that's about Nagarjuna.
Yeah, and that's like the one truth is the conventional truth, and that's what the empiricists, the world as it is, it's practical and so forth, right? and then there's the other truth, which
The
is the real
ultimate
truth.
truth.
And I think that was what, when Parmenides goes to that woman, a goddess, she's telling him, she's talking about that same thing, about two truths.
Great, thank you. That's a good point. And actually, I just did a presentation on the last Saturday on the Buddhism. I didn't think about Parmenides. Yeah, I talk about the Anaxagoras, two truths, the convenient truth and the ultimate truth, and they take the middle way, middle path on that.
Right, yeah, sort of a synthesis, a Hegelian synthesis.
Yes, yeah, but I didn't think about. Thank you for reminding me. I didn't think about. I also use two brains, but one west, one east, and then at the time I was too much in the Buddhism thinking, not thinking about Parmenides. So, yeah, thank you. So for the last two slides, I think I will do for the last two slides, and we can conclude the pre-Socratic. So thank you, everyone, and we have a smaller group, but turn out I think we are doing very well. At least I feel great on this. So basis Anaxagoras is on the other side. Remember, he's not on the southern Italian side. So after Parmenides, everybody tried to respond. Okay, why? Just like Hannah's question, right? They have the truth, and we see something different. How does these two things connect? So you will see the Empedocles talking about four elements, talking about the two forces, the love and the strife. And Anaxagoras on the other side. And according to some legend, he was the teacher of Socrates. Okay, so we don't know whether or not there's no solid evidence, but most scholars probably believe he was 30 years older than Socrates, and he faced the same situation as Socrates. He is being charged of impiety because he really, well, I should say he probably is an atheist. He didn't talk about God at all. He is a pure scientist, but he also had to respond what Parmenides is talking about, right? So basically, he is talking about the everything exists in everything. Okay, so so his famous argument is snow is black because snow includes everything, including some blackness there. So snow is black, and you can see the evidence when the snow melts. You will see some water. Sometimes it's black. So because all these people, they have to explain things is why things change, right? Since Parmenides sounds right, the logic, based on logic, they have the one truth, something not change, but you still have to explain what's going on in this world. You cannot just say, oh, that's the mortal belief, and then you got to need some step to explain. So Anaxagoras is on the other side, Asia Minor, and he traveled to Greek. So sometimes we consider he's the first travel to Athens. So he probably the first philosopher in Athens, and he taught Socrates, and Socrates supposed to be second philosopher in Athens. So he talked about coming in. He talked about the Greeks are wrong, right? Because they keep arguing something go to being or becoming, right? When you talk about becoming, you talk about Heraclitus. When you talk about being, you talk about Parmenides. So he talked about things should be coming into existence, mixture, and passing away, separation. So that's he's talking about. And then remember in Empedocles, four elements, then we have to deal with the force, right? Love and the strife. And here he deal with things he call nous. Okay, so we can call might in today's language. In Greek called nous. So basically nous is the force to bring things together or separate things to make the change. So of course it will be a little bit weird to talk about the nous is kind of material. So he talking about, so basics, not only people has mind, everything has mind. So like acorn will grow to the oak tree, they have mind to grow. So in a way, you can say he is teleologist. Okay, so everything has a purpose which is in mind. Okay, so that's the thing he is talking about, and then they all try to explain what's going on and then what's happened, how to explain, connect the so-called way of belief and the way of truth. So that's all this thing. And the data will come with the Athenian philosopher, Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. And we introduced it 2 months ago. And so next week, we are going back to Greece, but we are not going to talk about Plato, Aristotle, or Socrates. We're going to talk about the other school, which is atomist. Okay, so we will deal with atomist and Democritus and Epicurus. Okay, so during the same time, because personally, I believe during that time in the Greek world, in the essence, they are not 100% idealist like Plato. There's a strong belief of materialist like atomist, but they don't have a lot of writing left, so we probably ignore it. So next week we will talk about the Epicurus and Democritus. So we will then next week we will finish the Greek world and then we can move to the Roman world. So I will stop here and then for a few minutes, 10 minutes discussion if you have a question and you are willing to share your thought and your idea. So thank you everyone. So any question, any comment, and then
No, I have a question, Jason. I wonder if you thought about, it seems that Heraclitus felt that basically everything is in change, everything is in flux. The world is dynamic, constantly, in change. And Parmenides felt as if there was nothing changes. It's one solid block. Right?
yeah.
two very, different ways. I mean, I also think, as the century, as the centuries rolled on in the West and parallel things are happening in the East, which of these two ways of looking at the world is a dynamic, changing flux, or as sort of a static lump of, I just, it just brings up so many questions.
Yes, that's an interesting question, and that's I probably very interested on that. And as some of you know, I also host the Asian philosophy on Saturday, and then that's a concerning subject. Like I believe, I have to say, if I have to just oversimplify it, I would say I don't know Hinduism, okay, but I know Buddhism. Buddhism, if we go to the Mahayana school, basics, they were talking about the middle way, okay, and not on the change, not the convenient truth and ultimate truth. And then I probably will stay in between. And then Chinese probably will see more on the organic side. You probably believe the Chinese view of universe is very different. Chinese view will see more universe is not like you see in the in all these philosophers, okay, in the Greek, they all see things. Doesn't matter you are Heraclitian or Parmenidean, you all see things as inorganic. Okay, that's outside me, right? But Chinese will think that I'm part of this universe. So that's very different. Yeah, and it's difficult to explain just in a few minutes. Okay, so I hope I provide something useful for everyone, and then send information to me if you have a question, comment, suggestion. And thank you, Ron. It's a lot of very meaningful question, and then I also learned a lot from your comment and from your question. Yeah, thank you again. All right, so have a good evening and hope you join next week for we will complete the Greek philosophy, and I'm going to introduce the atomism, which is very different from Plato and Socrates and Aristotle. Thank you. See you next week.
Thank you so much, Jason.
Thank you.